Don't you guys love his reaction there? It's like an introvert just having the spotlight thrust on him. It's not the most comfortable of situations. Hey guys, in today's video, we're going to talk about Dolph Lundgren in Rocky IV. Much like his character Ivan Drago,
I must break you.
I'll be doing some breaking of my own, but I'll be breaking down his physique, his diet, and his training for Rocky IV. I'll also be talking about some of his workout methods prior to Rocky IV before he began his bodybuilding lifestyle training. Make sure to watch the previous video I did on Sylvester Stallone, by the way, when I covered his Rocky IV diet, training, and physique. I'll link it in the description below if you haven't seen it. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe if you like 80s and 90s action movies and martial arts, because I'm going to make the 80s and 90s great again on this channel. And you can do your part by gently clicking, moderately pressing, or Hulk smashing that like button. Any engagement with that like button really helps out the channel, so I appreciate it. Also, make sure to stay until the end, because you don't want to be a quitter, do you? That wouldn't be very Rocky-like. Sylvester Stallone initially planned for the Rocky series to be a trilogy. However, after the huge box office success of Rocky III, it was more or less inevitable that there was going to have to be a Rocky IV.
I just gotta do what I gotta do.
The challenge, of course, was finding a fresh slant, one that wouldn't make the story feel like more of the same. Enter the Drago. It was the mid-80s and the Cold War between America and Russia was at an all-time high. The two countries were viewed as the reigning superpowers of the world, and Stallone decided that Rocky should battle his Soviet equivalent, with America and Russia slugging it out, allegorically in the ring, of course. As far as casting goes, Stallone said, "At one time, I was looking for really a monster, like a hairy beast of a guy to play someone from the other side of the world." Dolph ended up being the complete antithesis, the opposite of what Stallone was looking for.
I will do the opposite.
Stallone figured, alright, why don't we move it into more of the sci-fi, like he's the man of the future.
The advances our country's made in the technology of human performance.
Over 8,000 people auditioned for the role of Ivan Drago in Rocky IV. It was literally an international talent search. Dolph said they were getting desperate, almost to the point of changing the plot, doing away with the idea of a Russian boxer because they couldn't find the right person. They needed somebody with a good body who could act, box, and speak with a Russian accent.
Drago, how does it feel to spar with the great former champion?
The man's tongue didn't come through customs.
The minute I heard about the part, I knew it was for me. I was determined to get it. Dolph Lundgren was first turned down by the casting directors for being too tall, but later on, he got the chance to send photos and meet Sylvester Stallone, who told him he had a good chance to get the part, but advised him to gain 20 pounds of muscle first. As far as Dolph goes,
You've seen him, you know how strong he is.
So Dolph Lundgren is roughly 6'5" and weighed between 240 and 250 pounds in Rocky IV, so he's a pretty tall guy.
I think the first thing you better get Apollo is a ladder.
Prior to Rocky IV, he was already in good shape and had an athletic build and background. Having trained in the martial arts since the age of 7, first with judo and then a few years later he took up karate, which he was really serious about and even competed, going as far as winning several Kyokushin karate competitions, including the Australia Open knockout tournament. Dolph says, "My physique and training totally changed when I got involved with Rocky IV and met Sylvester Stallone to do the audition for the movie. He told me I had to put on more upper body weight and more overall size. This made me start doing bodybuilding 6 days a week with different muscle group splits. He had several months to train before his Rocky IV screen test and ended up learning all he could about the techniques of bodybuilding from several fitness personalities at the time, such as Harold Poole and Lydia Chang." Sylvester Stallone said he wanted Lundgren to gain 10 kilograms, which is about 22 pounds. Dolph met Stallone in the summer of '84, and by Christmas he said he'd put on 5 kilograms of real muscle mass doing heavy bodybuilding training. After he got the part, he trained with Sylvester Stallone and managed to put on an additional 2 kilograms, in addition to getting a lot more cut. Going by what Lundgren says, he would have gained 15 pounds for Rocky IV, meaning he weighed roughly 225 to 235 prior to training for Rocky IV, though he claimed in an interview back in 1986 that he was only 215 pounds. This was in Muscle and Fitness, by the way, which I'm sure they would have wanted him to exaggerate his weight gain. Going from 215 to 250, though claiming to be 240 while shooting Rocky IV, would be more impressive than going from 235 to 250. Either way, it seems as if he roughly put on the 20 pounds Stallone wanted him to. If we look at some pictures of him, you can see he already had a pretty nicely developed body, notably his chest, and he was already pretty lean. So, of course, a lot of people are going to speculate whether Dolph Lundgren took steroids or not in order to prepare for Rocky IV, and it would make sense for him to to do whatever it took in order to get the part. During press for The Expendables 2 in 2012, he did an interview with Men's Health where they asked the question. In reference to action movies, Men's Health said, "Part of the job requires having big, rippling cinematic muscles. It must be tempting for some of these stars." Dolph Lundgren responded, "Oh sure, it never was for me because I was already a big guy when I started making movies. I didn't need to be any bigger, so steroids didn't make any sense. But if you're a regular size actor and you're in a movie where you're supposed to be some pumped up guy who takes his shirt off, yeah, steroids make sense." Men's Health said, "You've seen it?" Dolph said, "Well, I haven't witnessed the injections personally, but I recognize when it's happening. You know which guys are doing steroids and which ones aren't." And Men's Health replied, "You can tell just by looking?" Dolph said, "Oh yeah, it's pretty obvious. You can see the difference. There's a soft roundness to steroid muscles that you don't get when you're lifting weights or doing martial arts or things like that. I don't judge anybody. Everybody has their own life and people do what they want." I'll do a future Natty or Not video on Dolph Lundgren. I don't personally think he took anything for Rocky IV. Are you nuts? Though I'm sure the peanut gallery will come out in full force in the comment section and call me an idiot. There are some pretty rude people in that comment section at times. But I do like to focus more on the positive, and I'm grateful for the majority of you commenting, either in a respectful, funny, and or even informative way. It's good stuff. I get a kick out of it. I read them all. I figure if you spent the time typing it, it's only right if I read them, but I digress. So back to Dolph. Great looking physique aside, he didn't really seem to have the signs of steroid usage in Rocky IV. And I tend to give the people the benefit of the doubt, because if I can look like this at 40 all natural, why the hell couldn't a genetic super freak like Dolph look the way he did in Rocky IV at a much younger 27 years of age? Go ahead and follow me on Instagram, by the way. I'm going to post some workout related content on there if you're curious. I'm like the least followed guy on there, so it's pretty pathetic. So let's make that a little less pathetic. You could find me at Real Viking Samurai. But going back to Dolph, he did look a lot more questionable for 1987's Masters of the Universe, but as I mentioned, that'll all be covered in a future Natty or Not video. By the way, if you're into those kind of videos, make sure to check out the one I did on Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'll link it in the description below. For Rocky IV, Lundgren had to change up his karate routine. Instead of working on flexibility and speed, he had to pack on the muscles with weightlifting. Production for Rocky IV began at the end of April of 1985, so he had a good 9 months to add that 15 to 20 pounds, and he has a pretty big frame, so 15 pounds on him wouldn't nearly be as much as 15 pounds on someone who's under 6 foot, which is another reason why I give him the benefit of the doubt as far as being natural is concerned. As far as his training goes, prior to Rocky IV, when reflecting on his karate training, Dolph said, "You need a certain amount of slow twitch muscle fibers to have the endurance in addition to the speed. But I also think if you are involved in martial arts, you will build a certain muscle mass that gives you that harmonious physique." As mentioned, prior to Rocky IV, Dolph already looked pretty phenomenal. He said, "At first, I started building muscle for martial arts to become stronger and a better fighter. I did a lot of leg work with exercises like squats, deadlifts, and training with different leg machines." Dolph never really went super heavy on any of those lifts, claiming he never used more than 300 pounds on the squat or deadlift. But that's not to say he couldn't. I suppose he was just into higher reps, which, by the way, if you guys haven't tried 20 rep sets on the squat, I recommend it. It'll definitely wake you up and improve your conditioning. Dolph said, "I was very thin but muscular built with big, strong legs. I needed my big legs to move around at speed while keeping my perfect balance." Speaking of which, Van Damme exemplified that perfectly in one of my favorite scenes from Double Impact, which I'm always looking for an excuse to play on this channel.
For example, because of my big legs and karate, I can do the splits no problem.
Dolph also said, "Of course you needed a strong overall physique to throw hard punches. If you look at many fighters, they are very thin but muscularly built, so they have that torque in their body to produce power." Speaking of power punches, during a practice round, Sylvester Stallone told Dolph Lundgren to really go at it like how normal boxers do for 15 seconds. Long story short, Stallone ended up with a swelling pericarditis sac around his heart, had to be rushed to the emergency room by plane.
If he dies, he dies.
His insurance company thought he was faking it, saying that his injuries looked more from something like a head-on collision with the steering wheel if you hit your chest on it. Stallone replied, "Have you seen Dolph Lundgren? That's a truck. That's a steering wheel. That's a head-on collision.
Whatever he hits, he destroys."
His insurance company honored the claim soon after that. Dolph Lundgren said, "Sly not only wanted us to move like champion boxers, he wanted us to have the best looking physiques anyone ever saw in a ring, and that meant developing muscles that boxers don't usually develop." According to the aforementioned Muscle and Fitness interview, for Rocky IV, Lundgren worked out with Stallone 2 hours per day doing a bodybuilder type split routine in the morning, then he did 2 hours of boxing every day in the afternoon. For the bodybuilding workouts, the two men trained with George Pipasik, who ran the Santa Monica Bodybuilding Center. Make sure to check out the separate video I did on him, by the way, as I think we should appreciate and pay respect for this old school fitness icon. I'll link the video in the description below. George Pipasik, by the way, said that Stallone and Dolph trained with weights for about an hour a day with high intensity. This slightly contradicts the 2 hours Dolph claimed in that Muscle and Fitness interview, but again, that was in the Muscle and Fitness, which would want to exaggerate things in order to better impress the reader. As far as their training goes, they did a classic 3-day split. Push, pull legs, hitting each body part twice a week. Monday and Thursday was push day consisting of chest, shoulders, and tris. Tuesday and Friday was pull day consisting of back and bis. Wednesday and Saturday was leg day consisting of quads, hams, and calves, while Sunday was a rest day. Each workout consisted of 3 to 4 exercises per muscle group, 4 sets per exercise, and 6 to 12 reps per set. Basically a very tried and true classic bodybuilding style training. Dolph said, "I was taught the finer points of training by Sly and George Pipasik, the owner of the Santa Monica Bodybuilding Center. I learned about the weirder training techniques such as sets and reps, isolation training, shocking the muscles with techniques like supersets, force reps, peak contraction training, and negatives. The other component of their training would take place in the evening, which consisted of roughly 2 hours of boxing. The boxing was done at another gym Stallone had built nearby in Culver City, where the two men were trained by famed boxing coach Richard Giachetti, who has previously worked with such heavyweight champions like Larry Holmes and Mike Tyson. It should be no surprise that Stallone would surround himself in Lundgren with world-class trainers in the realm of bodybuilding and boxing, as Rocky IV was to be the ultimate cinematic showcase for East meets West. The two men essentially had to look like super soldiers.
It's us against them. What are you talking about? Come on.
Dolph had said in an interview, as production for Rocky IV came nearer, we trained faster and lighter in the gym and increased our sparring time. In their final days of training just prior to the start of filming, they were sparring for 4 hours a day. It should be noted that this time they did tone down the bodybuilding workouts, which by this point in their preparation consisted of just a few heavy sets, which would be enough to maintain the muscle mass they built, while getting all their definition and conditioning from those boxing workouts, and of course diet, which we need to talk about next.
Like your Papa. He ate his spinach every day.
Prior to working with Stallone and George Pipasik, to put on his initial size, Dolph said he increased his protein and caloric intake and cut back on cardiovascular activity to try to gain muscle weight as fast as possible, in time for that official casting call, of course. In reference to Rocky IV, Dolph said, "There were a lot of changes from when I did martial arts. We really didn't have anything like a nutrition plan back then, but we did practice carb loading before every fight. We would eat more protein and no carbs for 3, 4, even up to 5 days to deplete the body, and then would carb up with complex carbs a day before the fight. But for Rocky IV, it was different." Dolph continues, "Sylvester Stallone was very good with nutrition, and he put me on a much higher protein diet with less carbs and less fat. He also had me eating 5 to 6 meals per day with supplementation. I was living the life of a bodybuilder." Joe Weider had made up a series of supplement packs for Sly and Dolph. Bodybuilding supplements in the 80s were funny. They didn't even have creatine back then. That wouldn't come on the scene until the mid-90s. I think guys used to take desiccated liver tablets back then in the 80s, and of course they had amino acids, and there were several protein powders back then as well that I'm sure looked and tasted like clumps of chalk. But in general, the diet is classic bodybuilding, tried and true, 5 to 6 meals a day, high protein, lower fat and carb. His sample breakfast would be a protein shake with a banana. Lunch could be grilled fish with veggies and a few potatoes. Dinner would consist of something like chicken soup with rice and then fruit for dessert. Add some extra protein shakes and fruit between meals and you have the recipe for success. Sylvester Stallone usually arranged to have his own private chef on the set of Rocky IV, and Dolph usually ate alongside him. The two men really bonded on the set of Rocky IV and remained good friends till this day. They've even worked together again on 3 Expendables films between 2010 and 2014, and more recently in 2018's Creed II, which is essentially a sequel to Rocky IV. And speaking of Rocky IV, Stallone is currently putting the finishing touches on his director's cut of the film, so Stallone's still doing his part to make the 80s great again. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.